my next question was going to be to ask you how we can encourage advocacy and top tips. But you mentioned one there, which I think is really key, which is that processing time, and that takes patience on the person that's actually supporting and not rushing through. Because if you don't allow enough time, you can just be tempted to jump in and push that decision forward, and that.
So I think when it comes to that issue of kind of supporting decision making, and I guess we're kind of getting into the territory of kind of self-advocacy here, so that would be supporting the person to be able to speak up for themselves. And I think one of the things, and this could be one of those areas in which we're talking about things that might be a bit more specific to autism, compared, as opposed to other people who may need advocacy for different reasons. But one of the things that I found, I actually have an advocate myself, so I have a friend who advocates for me informally and has done for years now, and we've dealt with various issues that I've needed support through. So things like getting support at university through my PhD, things like accessing things like getting my Care Act assessment and going through legal proceedings in order to get that, and various things, as well as more kind of day-to-day things like doctor's appointments and things like that. But one of the things that we've needed, and that I've needed before any of the actual advocacy part, so traditional advocacy, we might sort of think it starts at a meeting, or I think for autistic people, certainly for me and for autistic people that I've known over years, one of the difficulties is that it's so difficult for us to actually know what decision we would make, or what's on our mind, or even to know how we feel about something, or and there are some biological, physiological reasons why it's maybe more likely that an autistic person might experience that. In my case, my sensory nervous system is it's a bit lazy at telling my brain kind of what I'm feeling. So things like registering pain and understanding pain and things like that tend to be a bit kind of hit and miss. So there are things like that, but I think, and that's where the focus has always been when it comes to autism and decision making and things. There's always been this suggestion that we it can be part of our presentation to struggle to name our feelings and our emotions and things. And there's a lot of us are kind of diagnosed with a secondary condition called alexithymia, which is to do with difficulties in naming our emotions and identifying our feelings. But I think there's another side to that as well, in addition to that interpretation that maybe sometimes gets missed, and that's the fact that all of us, whether we're autistic or not, as social people, as a social species, we understand ourselves by reference to the people around us. And typical people who are surrounded by people who are by and large like them, get an awful lot of positive reinforcement for their interpretation of the world by the fact that it's give or take similar to those around them. So for example, if something happens to you and it's something you experience as painful, and you say, ouch or something, people around you are likely to interpret that as something that they also would find painful. So they empathize because there's that shared understanding that you've experienced pain, and so therefore you get your experience of pain validated by the fact that it's in common with those around you. And I mean, that's something that happens right from birth, as humans, when it comes to babies in cribs starting to smile at their caregivers, and the smile comes back and it's reinforced, and right from the word go, those kinds of shared interaction kind of reinforce us and who we are and how we experience the world. Whereas obviously we know that for autistic people, often our experience of the world and our perspective on it is not quite aligned with most of those around us. So it might be that things happen to us that are really painful, and we get told that we're not, that we're making a fuss over nothing, or or things might happen to us that actually are really exciting, and we get told that we go on about them too much, or there are various ways in which our ways of being and doing are not validated by those around us, and that makes it very difficult to actually have confidence in yourself and in your own perspective.
So I think what you're saying, what you're really highlighting, Jo, which I think is really, really important. I'm sorry to interrupt there, but it's so important, isn't it? Because we know about the high rate of mental health difficulties with autistic individuals. But I was listening to you there and thinking, yeah, you're so right. The joint referencing and things that goes on from a very early age, and if you start to express your opinion and you're in pain, from lights and noise, and then that is dismissed, that really invalidates that experience. So you're going to not express your voice. You're going to hold back,
and you're probably going to doubt yourself as well, because like anybody who experiences chronic illness or disability or anything, it kind of flips the whole kind of way in which you interpret what's going on. You constantly kind of doubting yourself, maybe thinking, well, is it this or is it that? And you can be out there on your own because, there's nobody else who's having that experience with you and things. And so basically it can be very difficult to kind of be in a position where you feel confident enough to go out on a limb and say, this is my experience. And I think there are another couple of factors that certainly I've picked out from my experience that can make it difficult to actually speak out. One of those that I've realised, and it's taken me so long to realise, and I've really only just got there, but I'm going to share it because it's been a really powerful realisation for me. So we know that when it comes to interaction, that obviously our nervous system is kind of always involved when we're interacting, and we get kind of spikes of like arousal, of adrenaline, of all that kind of all the kind of the hormones, cortisol and things that kind of keep us going, and that kind of go up and down as we're making eye contact or whatever. And one of the things that I've found is that when it comes to, verbal interaction is difficult for me anyway. Talking is difficult for me anyway. It's all exhausting. But what I've realised is that when it comes to saying anything where I'm not sure of the response I'll get, or saying anything where it might be perceived as negative, the amount of feedback I get from my nervous system, the spike of kind of the fight or flight response, and the way that my nervous system goes into that fight or flight mode is so intense. And particularly if I'm in a position where I'm generally anxious anyway, and I am generally anxious, I live with like my baseline is kind of severe anxiety. So if I'm in a position where I'm having to say, I don't want that to happen, or I don't want to do that, or anything that is a kind of a negative, I can't do it because I can't cope with that extra spike of arousal. So the amount of times when I get into positions of saying that I'll do things, or saying that I'll go along with things just to avoid that, and actually it ends up being me who's the one who then ends up overworked or picking up the pieces or whatever because I couldn't say no, is a trap that I've got myself into more times than I'd care to remember. And I mean, the good thing about realizing this is that actually what I realize is that actually what I need is just processing time and time away from the person. You know, so if you ask me to do something, I'm probably going to ask you to put it in an email for me, and I'll reply by email, or I'll get somebody else to reply by email for me.
That's a good tip. And then you can read that and take the time to process it, can't you?
And that's kind of an example of how I found advocacy has really worked for me, in the sense that what Kath and I do is that we use WhatsApp. I mean, that just happens to be the app that we use, but
could be any messenger app.
Basically, we've got a kind of an open platform between the two of us, and you know, we've got an agreement that I put in there whatever I want, and you know, I basically, sometimes I think out loud, sometimes I just, it's my space, and you know, and I can think things through and put things in there that I wouldn't necessarily say to people because I'd be too scared of how they might react or something. But it's basically, it's a space, it's a thinking space, and that's been really invaluable because it's helped me to recognize things and to make sense of things, and you know, to actually be able to get that kind of social input that I don't get otherwise, because I can't put it out there in kind of more traditional kind of conversation formats. So it's been a thinking space for me. It's also a place where we can kind of keep a record of things for, you know, when it comes to meetings or form filling or anything. There's all my thinking processes in there, and Kath's aware of it as well. Sometimes Kath notices patterns that I don't notice. And also for me personally, having things in black and white is incredibly important because it makes them much more real and believable and understandable than things that are just verbal, just spoken, or you know, it I personally really rely on that kind of black and white sort of tangible sort of thing. So
we were talking about this earlier, weren't we, the difference between receptive and expressive communication.
Yeah.
And I think people would listen to you and you sound so eloquent and would think, oh, you know, she won't need advocacy, but actually it's
I don't generally meet what people expect severe autism to look like, but
people make assumptions, don't they, unfortunately? And
and it's, I mean, I've kind of got to the point now where the impact on my health has been so severe that now I look obviously disabled anyway, and I'm a wheelchair user and things like that. So but yeah, so I think what I'm getting at with Kath and me and our WhatsApp and things is that that's not, when we go back to the kind of the job that I describe and the you know, the sort of issue focused crisis model of advocacy, that kind of ongoing you know, thinking space and working things through is not necessarily what's generally thought of as part of kind of traditional professional advocacy services. But it's been invaluable to me because the amount of times when I've disengaged with services because they've expected me to just go into a room and be able to spit out what I think or what I want or something. And it doesn't happen. It won't happen for various reasons. So I just disengage. And that's happened so many times, and I end up blaming myself. It needs a different approach for me to really have true advocacy.